I'd like to welcome everybody to this workshop of the Journal of Medical Imaging and Radiation Oncology on how to successfully publish an original article. I'm Michael Barton. I am the editor-in-chief of the journal. I would like to start by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which this video conference is hosted. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where my colleagues are located today in Australia and New Zealand, and pay my respect to their elders past, present and future. In recognition that we're a binational college, I take this opportunity to acknowledge Maori as Tangata Whanahu and the Treaty of Waitangi Partners in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I am the editor-in-chief of the journal. I have been editor-in-chief for 3 years. We have a program now of webinars to help improve the quality of the journal. It's reviewing, which we did last year, to help people get started with the research and to deal with some of the issues that come up from your questions and answers. So the seminar will be a number of presentations on writing an original article, the new movement on open access publishing, which our publisher Wiley and the libraries, university libraries have reached, which will give us even greater access. We're going to have some interactive sessions on reporting guidelines and how they can improve the quality of your publication. We're going to talk about search engine optimization and how to get your paper cited. And finally, we're going to have a question and answer session. If you have questions during the talks today, could you please enter them in the question box? This appears as a little window on the right of your screen, and we will attempt to answer all of those in the last session of the day. So I would like to now introduce the first presenter, Professor Jeff Delaney. Jeff is a radiation oncologist at Liverpool Hospital and clinical leader of the Translational Cancer Research Network of Sphere. His main interest is in breast cancer. He has over 200 publications and he has 2 research theses, doctorates by thesis. So he's reviewed manuscripts from many journals, including the Lancet, Radiotherapy and Oncology, the International Journal of Radiation Oncology, Biology and Physics, and he's an assistant editor for the English journal Clinical Oncology. So Jeff is going to talk today about writing an original article, tips from writing draft 1 to the submitted version, and perhaps also how to deal with some of those dreadful reviewers. So Jeff, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk about this topic. So I've been asked to just talk for the next 15 minutes or so on what to consider when thinking about whether or not your work is publishable. So these are the types of questions you need to ask yourself when you are doing research. Firstly, is my work publishable at all? Is it of interest to other people outside your immediate group? And also how many publishable units there are. People doing research are often guilty of what I'd call salami publication, where they attempt to publish them in as small a unit as possible, whereas I've always maintained that you're best off publishing quality rather than quantity. And so if those units are better published in one unit, then you're better off going that way than trying to cut it into 2 fine a bit so that you can score 2 publications rather than 1. You need to ask yourself too, why are you publishing? Obviously, it's a metric for people to measure academics by, but there are lots of other reasons to publish. Most notably, that you think that other people might be interested in your idea or your research, and you'd like to get your work out there so that others start commenting about it. You also need to think about where you want to publish your research and whether or not it's better off in a general journal, a journal read by general practitioners and general physicians, or whether it needs to be in a specialist journal like diagnostic imaging or radiation oncology, and also in terms of impactfulness, whether or not an international journal would be interested versus a local journal. And there are lots of considerations about where you might publish. The most important, of course, is who do you want to read it? There's no point in writing an article about radiation oncology and then putting it in a purely medical oncology journal, for example. You also need to be aware, and hopefully this seminar series today will make you aware of these differing publishing costs and styles. So there are standard peer-reviewed articles, which are closed access, meaning that people need either a subscription to the journal or need to pay for your article to gain access to the full article. There is what is called open access, where people can access your full article online, and then there are different models of that. One is delayed, where it's closed for a period of time before it is then opened, and there are other hybrid models. The other thing to be aware of is that there are a vast number of what are called predatory or bogus journals. So journals that really prey on naive researchers who will pay large reproduction costs into journals that really are not set up in what you would call peer-reviewed journals. And for example, I came across this article in a journal called Omics, which is a predatory journal of the evolution of flight characteristics in avian porcine physiology, or in other words, the evolution of pigs might fly. So just a word on predatory journals, because they are becoming harder to distinguish from mainstream journals. Firstly, you may not have heard of the journal, but the journal can have words in the title which make you think that it is a standard journal. So you might need to go to the board of editors to show that members are not recognised in their field or are affiliated with questionable institutions. But also just be aware that board member names may be used without their permission. Journals with dubious addresses for their registered office. Be aware particularly of unsolicited email or paper communications inviting publications in journals you don't know and have never heard of. And also just be aware of unsolicited invitations to conferences run by event managers, not professionals in the area. And they're often at attractive destinations, but they will often attempt to attract you at exorbitant registration costs to present your work. And when you get there, you find that there's very little, if any, audience. Here is just an example. This was an email that I got, and remembering that once you publish, if you're the administering author, the corresponding author, then just be aware that often your email contact details are now open to other people to contact you. So I got this email once saying, based on my expertise in the field of dentistry, and I've never published anything in dentistry, we are pleased to inform you that we're accepting papers for the upcoming edition. Now, the funny thing about this story is that my secretary saw this and thought, oh, we better contact the journal and make sure that they know that he's currently away. And so she emailed the journal and said, look, he's away at the moment. Can I do anything for you? And they invited my secretary to be part of the editorial board. So just beware of predatory journals. So the essential steps when thinking about publishing, firstly, if you have a piece of research that you think is publishable, the first question is, what journal should you publish in? And so I would ask myself these 6 questions before deciding on what journal. So where have similar studies been published? There might be a journal that's particularly interested in a particular aspect of the work that you're publishing, and so they may be very interested to follow up other published works with your published work. What is the impact of the study? If it's of high impact, then obviously you would go for a higher impact journal. And I usually aim high and then work down in terms of reach of the journal. Some of you may or may not be aware that most journals have got what is called an impact factor. That's usually a reflection of the prominence of the research work in that journal that's previously been published. It's based on a metric calculation of the citation number of previously published papers. And usually the higher the impact factor, the higher the importance of the journal, with some very general journals like Nature or New England Journal of Medicine having very high impact factors. For diagnostic radiology and radiation oncology, which would be largely considered niche areas, the impact factor is a lot lower normally than those general journals. But even within both of those specialties, there is a hierarchy of impact factor. You also need to consider what audience do you want and what audience do you expect. Who are the journal's audience? So does the audience you want match up with the journal's audience? And also, what's the journal's rejection rate and rejection speed? And you may not necessarily know that, but some of your more experienced colleagues may be aware of that. And the reason why I say that is that if you're aiming for a high journal where you think that it's likely that it will be rejected, then it's not a big deal to submit it to that journal if their turnaround time in rejection is relatively fast. Really, all you've done is wasted a small amount of time, but you've taken the opportunity of attempting to publish in a journal of higher impact. Some of the important considerations should be to, in terms of your writing style, is to read the template of other successfully published papers and also copy, in inverted commas, that template. Now, I don't mean plagiarize. I mean that most well-written scientific articles all look very similar because there's largely a template that's sitting behind each of those scientific papers. And most instructions to authors for most publications give you very much a guide as to what they expect in each part of the paper. So if you're aware of papers that you believe are well written, then there's no harm in taking that template and following that template with your words. Just don't plagiarize their words. Be aware that there are plagiarism checkers that can check for strings of words, so please don't plagiarize. And also pay particular attention to writing scientifically, and that's often a challenge for people who write research papers for the very first time, is that you tend to write less scientifically than others. And it's a skill to develop over time where you hone your writing into a more scientific style. And I'll mention later some of the ways that you can improve that scientific writing over time. Probably the most important bit of advice I can give you is read the instructions to the authors. There's nothing more infuriating to a reviewer or to a journal editor than none of the instructions to the authors have been followed and the editorial office having to chase you up to change what you've done into the format that they want. The next thing to decide is what type of paper are you writing? And there are many different types of papers, from an original piece of research or full report through to case reports, brief notes, technical notes, letter to the editor and review article. And for most journals, firstly, some journals don't accept case reports or technical notes. And for most journals, they will give you a guide as to what is expected for each of these different types of publications in terms of word number, number of table and figures. The next important thing to do is to decide who you're writing this paper with. Now, obviously, if you've written a research protocol, it's generally with the people that you've done the research with. But you may also need to call upon expertise of others outside that group. So firstly, you need to decide amongst the group who's the principal author, who's the person that's going to take the responsibility of taking the original research idea and putting it into a publication and take full responsibility for the submission and the ultimate addressing of the reviewer's comments. And usually that's fairly obvious, but it's not always obvious, particularly between a junior researcher and a senior researcher. So it's always important to have that conversation between the junior and the senior very early on as to who is expecting to be the junior principal author or the senior author. It might seem a little bit trivial to talk about the order of the authorship, but I can guarantee this can often be a bone of contention, particularly when people have similar amounts of input. I don't have a specific answer about how you address that other than attempt to address it early and openly. And my advice is to list authors in terms of the amount of effort that they have put into the execution of the research and then the publication. If people have truly had equal input, then you best off list those people in alphabetical order. Often the more senior researcher who may have overseen the research is often regarded as the last or senior author. But it's also important that if authors want to be part of the paper, they need to be prepared to do some work. So it's important that the principal and the senior author allocate tasks to individuals to ensure that there is adequate input from each of the authors to fulfill the criteria for author. Does it matter? Yes, I think it does matter. I think that there are rules around authorship, and some journals actually specifically request information from each individual about each individual's input into the paper. And I've never heard of it occurring, but I would imagine those journals would reject authorship for people that have not had adequate input. And I've just listed here the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, who list 4 criteria, and notice the word "and" at each of the dot points. So it's not about involvement in one dot point, it's involvement in all 4 dot points. I won't read them, I'll just leave them there for a second for you to read. Okay, so let's assume that you're a junior researcher, you haven't had much experience in writing a paper. So here's some practical advice for the principal investigator. So for the first draft, allow a decent allotment of time to do it in a block. Don't look at doing 20 minutes here and 30 minutes there. Allocate yourself a quiet work environment. This is not a thing that you do between patients in clinic. And start with what you believe to be the easiest section first. Often it's the materials and methods, because often that's been written as part of the protocol. And although it might require tweaking after you've done the analysis, it's usually the easiest bit to do. The introduction is often easy to do as well, because you've often considered the introductory comments when you've considered writing the research protocol. My advice is to map out sections and paragraphs and main points largely with dot points to begin with, so that you can flesh out what the paper skeleton looks like, and particularly if there's going to be a very tight word count, you can already start concentrating on the amount of words that you'll allocate to each of the sections. Try to keep the same order in the various sections. There's nothing worse than reading the primary aim and the secondary aim, and then in the materials and methods, reading how the secondary outcomes were calculated before writing about the primary outcome analysis, and then reading in the results section the tertiary outcomes before the primary and the secondary. Try to keep the same order of primary outcome, secondary outcome in the abstract, materials and methods, results, and even in your discussion. I don't tend to worry about terms or grammar in my first draft, and in fact I often call my first draft a vomit on a page. So it's basically just vomiting all the information that you have about this research down into a rough first draft, using the skeleton but not really worrying about the specific wording and tightening the scientific nature of the wording. It also might pay to consider discussing your preliminary data in a forum that encourages comment, such as a departmental grand rounds or journal club, because the people in the audience who then might comment might actually make some very interesting comments about your preliminary data that you've never thought about before. And so it might help you consider your interpretation of the results and whether or not you've adequately analysed the data. So I think it's always very good practice to discuss your research findings in a friendly forum in a fairly early part of the writing. The basic draft will normally follow a construct that's dictated by the particular journal, but it's roughly in the order that I've just laid out here. In terms of the abstract, I usually do the abstract last. It's a very important part of the paper, as many will not read anything beyond the abstract, or they might scan the abstract before deciding whether or not to read the whole paper. And in fact, for closed access, they would then evaluate whether or not that they're going to purchase the paper. You write it in the same style as the paper with the same order. You make sure that you cover all the key points. So if it is read alone without the remainder of the paper, it will give the reader a good idea of what the main findings were. Generally, it's between 100 and 250 words, and try to use the same headings as the body of the paper. It's very important not to present data in the abstract that does not appear in the main paper, nor conclusions that appear in the main paper. In terms of the introduction, the types of things that you might include what makes the topic interesting and important, what preceding work has built up to you wanting to answer the question that you've put before the audience, why do the study at all, what were the specific aims, both primary and secondary, and any references that help formulate the methodology. In materials and methods, this should really be regarded as a recipe book where some other group with the same type of resources can pick up the materials and methods and completely replicate your work. So it's a blow-by-blow account of what was done, so that if anyone wants to repeat what you've done, they can replicate the study without ever having to write to you. It includes how you define the study population, any exclusions that you might have made, the statistical analysis methods, but it's important not to present any results in the materials and methods section. And it's a common mistake that results often appear in materials and methods, and equally materials and methods appear in the results. So make sure that you don't present methods in the results. In the results, you define and describe the study numbers and the exclusions, whether the study cohort is balanced or unbalanced, key results, usually in the order of the aims. And just remember, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So are the results best off in a table, as a text, or as a graph? And usually pick one, not all of them. Then moving to the discussion, you summarize the key results first. Often a mistake is to start talking about other literature before talking about your own study. I think the first paragraph should always be reserved for summarizing the key results and what they might mean in terms of importance of the study. And once again, it should be in order with the primary and secondary aims of your paper. You then compare your results with the literature. How do the studies differ? Why do you think they differ? Is your study better or worse than the previous studies? If some of the work has already been published and the other people have found the same thing you did, why is your study worth publishing to the journal if the findings are the same? You need to stress the strengths of your study over previous literature. It may even be just to update the results of a paper that's quite old. It's also very important, though, in order to provide a balanced discussion, that you also include the limitations of the study, and every single study have limitations. So think about your patient cohort and whether or not there are limitations there that you need to include in the discussion. I would then talk about how the results may impact and what this might lead to in terms of future research. And then moving on to the conclusion, I would go over the main findings, what the findings mean, and what the future direction should be, usually in no more than 3 sentences. In terms of tables and graphs, only use them if better than text. Make sure that they're clear and easily understood for people that are unfamiliar with your research. You need to have a clear legend with good labeling, and ensure all statistics presented are appropriate. In terms of instructions to authors, each journal has a particular style regarding the headings and the reference style. The referencing style can vary, and there are various different types of referencing styles, and so you need to refer to the journal instructions to get that. Read the instructions carefully and follow them. I can't stress that enough. So after you finish draft 1, I recommend that you let that sit for a little while and sleep on it and just have a think about it, maybe discuss your results with other people. And then for draft 2, I would start adding in the authors and their affiliations. I'd check my author order. I would check the content and the relationships and the structure of each of the paragraphs, and then I would really tighten the wording. So where you can say things in 1 or 2 words, where you've said it in 8 words, very important to cut that down so that it's not like an essay you did in English on what I did on my holidays. Tighten your wording and try to get it close to the word count, and really slash and burn anything that you don't feel is necessary in order to get your main point across. Read it very critically and ensure you have written precisely. Check your tense. Often papers can be written in multiple tenses, such as past and present tense. You're better off picking one tense and keeping to that tense. Consider having an experienced writer who does not know your work to read it and be critical, at least for your first few papers. And often your senior author will also need to take responsibility for tracking changes. And I always regard it as an important part of my role as a senior author that I always track my changes back to the chief investigator, excuse me, so that they're aware of the changes that I've made, so that that can improve their writing over time. And to be honest, if I read the first few papers I wrote, again, I would be highly critical of the way that I wrote, because this is a long learning curve. You need to acknowledge any funding sources. Thank you. You need to acknowledge any funding sources, and this is the time I would start sending out the draft to your co-authors. And depending on response, you may need to do drafts 3, 4, or 5 before you've got something that that you can publish. Annoying issues for reviewers: authors who don't follow instructions, missing information, poor grammar and spelling. If you can't be bothered fixing your grammar, the reviewer can't be bothered reviewing your paper, is often an attitude you get from reviewers. Sweeping comments without data to support it, over discussing results, and manuscripts that are generally hard to read. You need a cover letter. I think it should be short, simple, and why it is of interest to the readership. When you get the reviewer comments back, don't take offense or give up. Everybody gets reviewers' comments. Consider the changes carefully. Have a sound argument if you do not wish to take a recommendation. Consider whether the changes are worthy of the effort or whether you decide to go for a different journal. And structure your reply so that each point can be easily tracked and cross-referenced to page and line number, so that reviewers' jobs are easy to see that you've responded. When you finally get accepted, you'll be asked to review page proofs, and this is really just making sure that there have been no transcription issues. The main issues I find is sometimes table and graph format can change. It's important to check the detail, obviously, because this is going to be published under your name, and there are usually short turnaround times of 24 to 48 hours. And then rejoice in publication. I think it's a great achievement to get things published. And reprints are sort of gone by the wayside, but you can order reprints if you want to pass them around to your friends. If your paper gets rejected, don't take it personally. Often the journal will provide reviewers' views, and then either you consider an objection. I haven't heard of too many objections getting up, although I've objected against a reviewer once and got my paper published. Incorporate any changes based on the criticism and consider applying to another journal. The other ways to get writing experience is read widely, but specifically looking at the style. Keep papers that you regard as well written to use as a guide. be part of a research team, and I can't stress enough, agree to be a reviewer when asked so that you can critically review other people's work, because I think it sharpens your ability to write. Don't reinvent the wheel. Look at what you regard as good and copy the template. Keep the writing precise, don't give up, and get some mentorship. And I'll leave this slide up just for a few seconds, but I strongly recommend this book that Michael Barton actually gave me a very long time ago, but it's still available. And it's a very easy to read book on writing successfully in science, including how to write a PhD, how to write posters and PowerPoint presentations. And I think it's a very good, cheap read for people that are interested in publishing their work. I really appreciate being asked to give this presentation.
Thanks very much, Jeff. Very comprehensive discussion. And for the audience's information, JMIRO does have a plagiarism checker, and every paper is routinely put through it. It's not usually a problem with research from Australia and New Zealand. We're now going to move on to the open access environment that Jeff discussed in his talk. I think it's a very salutary discussion of predatory journalism, but we're now moving to a new era of open access journalism publication in cooperation between the universities in particular and publishers. So Mr. Simon Goody, who's the Journal Publishing Manager for Wiley, is going to talk about this new arrangement, which will mean that we'll be able to get a much broader audience for our publications. Simon has worked in journal publishing for over 18 years in both production and in the editorial environments. He's managed an extensive list of journals from across the social and health sciences over that time, worked with numerous societies and colleges throughout the Asia Pacific region to grow and develop their portfolios. We're very lucky he is the supervising publisher for JMIRO. Has given us a lot of help and assistance, and he's going to talk today on the new open access arrangements with the Council of Australian Universities. Thank you, Simon.
Thanks for the opportunity to talk to everyone today, and I think that it's exciting times in publishing where we look at open access and broadening the reach of the publishing work that's being done. And I think we hear Jeff talking so much about the effort and the time that it takes to produce quality research and find a home for that. A lot of what the discussion today is about is how do we promote that and how do we extend the reach. And I think that's the core premise of open access publishing is pushing that ahead. So really happy to be talking about this today. And talking particularly in terms of JMIRO itself and a recent agreement between Wiley and the Council of Australian University Librarians to expand open access publishing across JMIRO and the Wiley portfolio more broadly. Jeff touched on open access publishing very briefly, but I wanted to go into a bit more detail and talk about the advantages to publishing under open access terms. I'll touch on the different types of open access publishing in a minute, but just to kind of hit some headlines here, we look at a much greater rate of readership of article downloads. We see that there's up to about a three times multiplier on article downloads when we talk about open access versus closed access or subscription publishing. We see that there can be up to around a 2 times citation multiplier. And when we look at altmetrics, those non-citation impacts of publishing, we can see a really significant multiplier there as well. And that's all on the back of increased access to content. Just so we can have a couple of definitions in place before we go ahead, I wanted to touch on the different flavors of open access publishing and compare those to subscription publishing, which has been the traditional model with academic publishing in the past. Under the subscription model, it's pay to read. content is published under a copyright agreement with the owner of the journal, that content is published in the journal, but only then made available to subscribers or on a pay-per-view model. As you can expect, that limits the audience of the research, and particularly when we talk about public access, patient access, it's quite a limiting model, but it is the model we've had for quite some time, and is what we've seen in other forms of publishing at the moment. Open access is very much emerging in the research sphere more so than other publishing areas. So what open access sets out to achieve is to turn that model upside down and make published articles and published content freely available so that anyone can read it. As soon as something is made open access, it's available to read with no paywalls, no access concerns. We split this largely into two coloured options, gold and green. Looking at gold open access, this tends to be the defined by the paid for model. So typically in the past, this has been an author paid model. The point of this discussion is to talk about how that's changing. But the idea behind gold is that articles are made immediately available to read as soon as they're published. An article publication charge is levied for that. Authors retain copyright as opposed to assigning it to the journal owner or to a publisher. The articles are instead published under a Creative Commons license, and they're in the models that we're looking at, particularly where it comes to JMIRO and to Wiley. We look at options within a fully open access journal or in a hybrid journal, which enables gold open access articles to be published in an otherwise subscription-based journal. Where we talk about hybrid, that's the model that JMIRO's got at the moment as well. And it's facilitating a lot of transition from the subscription model over to an open access model. Green open access, on the other hand, is more of an archived model of publishing. Articles are published within an existing subscription journal, so this also applies to JMIRO. This option is available for JMIRO authors. And again, it's about making a version of the article free to read to anyone who wants to look at it. The difference between green and gold is that it will be the author who uploads a version, typically the submitted version or the accepted version of their article, to a repository. So if you are talking about someone who's publishing in a university environment, the university systems now tend to have their own repositories of work, and an author would upload content to that, and after a certain embargo period, that would then be free to access. So there's a slight difference between gold and green. Where we talk about the hybrid publishing model, and as it relates to this call presentation, we'll be talking about the gold open access terms, which is immediately open access as soon as it's published, with a fee that applies to that. Looking at the differences in the publishing models, you start to see how there's all of these open access models are not created equal, and you see that the base rate of downloads, citations, and altmetric scores for subscription articles in the first column here compared to a fully gold open access journal, in a hybrid journal such as JMIRO, where there's that the option of subscription or open access publishing, and then green open access at the very end here. And we can see that even there's a massive increase when we start talking about open access, but we see that really coming to the fore when we talk about the hybrid model. And this is where we get those figures I mentioned at the start of the presentation around that almost 300% increase in readership, the 100% increase in citations, and an increased non-citation impact. These results are based on a study that Wiley conducted, which looked at almost 160,000 articles, under all of these different models. So we're starting to build a really clear picture of what this looks like, and the results are fairly compelling, I think you'll agree here, and underpin why there's been such a movement towards open access recently. That then sets the stage for the recent agreement between the Council of Australian University Libraries and Wiley. In the past, the Council of Australian University Librarians, which represents, well, in this case, it's representing 52 institutions across Australia and New Zealand. In the past, this body has negotiated with Wiley on the subscription model. So rather than negotiating with every individual institution, they band together and they use that bargaining power to work with publishers and to come to their agreements. In the past, that has been for a subscription model, where it's been pay to read, and Call has negotiated subscription access to Wiley content, including JMIRO, up until this year. From 2022, that changes, and that's now split. And what we've got now is a read and publish deal. This enables all of the Call institutions that are signed up to the deal to read all of Wiley's content, so that doesn't change, but it also includes an open access publishing component as well. The idea is that, the staff and researchers under the Call libraries will also be able to publish in Wiley journals with no direct charge to the author. There is still a publishing fee that's levied to support the publishing process and to keep the journal moving, but that's all handled on the back end between the universities and Call and Wiley. So for you as an author, as long as you can establish that you are a constituent of an included university, that's all you need to do. You can publish under gold open access terms and take the benefits of those increased readership and citation stats. This is a big change. So it's moving fundamentally Australian research into a more open access position. And we hope to see that this greatly increases the availability of Australian research, the impact that it can have, and the accessibility both in Australia but also globally to the research that is coming out of the university system. We're looking at covering around 6,000 papers for the year. So it should be covering all of the substantial research that's coming out. When we look at the eligible institutions, I won't dwell on this. The full list of eligible institutions is available on a call link I'll give in a moment. But the eligibility is that you must be affiliated with one of those universities in Australia or New Zealand. It does cover all of the New Zealand universities, which is great. It's not just the Australian institutions. And that is typically assessed by the affiliation that you give in the paper you've submitted, but also on your email address. So if you are submitting to a journal, please make sure that that you do prioritise your university affiliation if you do have a split, if that's appropriate, and use the corresponding email address, and that will make sure that you can go straight through. It also applies to primary research and review articles. That means that we're not talking about letters to the editor or editorials or the smaller article types, but where we talk in this presentation about writing original articles in particular, that should be covered. I've left a couple of links there. The Call site has all the details about eligibility and some of the specifics about that. If you do have any questions though, I would encourage you to contact your institutional library staff. They're the ones who'll be working with Call, and they'll be the ones who will know how this applies to your particular institution and if there are any other eligibility quirks that you might have to bear in mind. I'll finish up by mentioning that this isn't the only deal that's going on. Certainly Wiley's not the only publisher that is striking these deals, and certainly Australia is not the only place. And you can see here what our coverage looks like of the global publishing output. And you can see that this is very much a European-based movement at the moment, but starting to spread and starting to move across the US as well. And you can see the relative percentages of articles covered. Looking at Australia, this will cover about 70% of Australian publications, but there's still that 30% that isn't covered. And when we think about a discipline that has a strong practical, practice-based and professional membership, that could be the case for JMIRO as well. The good part about publishing in a hybrid journal like JMIRO is that open access isn't the only option now. There's still the hybrid model falling back to subscription-based publications. So if you aren't affiliated with a core university or a library, then that's not to worry. You still have the subscription-based model to publish in JMIRO. So I think that brings me to time. Thank you very much for the opportunity. There's the links that I'll leave up on screen for a moment, and happy to take any questions at the end of the session today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. It's very exciting change. I mean, the reason that you publish is because you want people to read your work, and this greatly increases the chance of readership. We are recording this. All the links will be available on the recording from the college website after the session has closed. And next speaker is Ms. Cherry Augustine. Cherry is a radiation therapist educator at Western Sydney Local Health District. She joined the JMIRO as an associate editor in 2011 and has been a stalwart ever since. She was appointed editor-in-chief of the Journal of Medical Radiation Sciences in 2013, which is an open access journal. And I believe, Cherry, is that right?
That's correct. Fully open access.
It is a journal that JMIRO has an arrangement with if we think that papers would be better suited in JMRS, we will refer them there. So Jeff mentioned the idea of looking at a template by looking at other published papers. Cherry is going to now take you through that whole process using a specific template that is widely adopted and with an example of a very interesting paper. So thank you very much, Cherry, for contributing to this.
Thank you, Dr. Barton, for that wonderful introduction. So yes, as Dr. Barton have said, I'll be talking about reporting guidelines. And first of all, thank you very much to the audience for joining us this afternoon. So studies have shown that there's poor reporting of published studies. It was found that there are non-reporting or delayed reporting of whole studies, that there are omissions or selective reporting of research methods, interventions, results, and harms. It was found that the publications are confusing at times or misleading presentations of results, data, and graphs. So why is poor reporting a concern? I will give you a moment to think about this. It's really, really important. I need to convince you that it is important to have high quality of reporting. Now, I hope one of your responses is on this slide. Now, poor reporting is a concern. It is difficult or impossible to assess how the research was conducted. Poor reporting is a concern because it is difficult or impossible to evaluate the study reliability or to place them in the context of existing research evidence. It is difficult or impossible to use the results to change practice, and those that changed or continued the practice might harm patients, including those involved in future research. So that's how reporting guidelines came about. Their aim is to improve the quality of reporting. The people that created them, they are experts, and it's developed through general consensus. And I've also seen with their publications, I've also seen that they've done a comprehensive literature review, and they've figured out what is considered high quality publication. These reporting guidelines list the minimum requirements. But please do keep in mind that some of the listed items in the guideline may not be relevant with your particular research. There are, of course, studies that looked at whether or not these reporting guidelines actually can improve the quality of reporting. It's been found that there is significant improvement in the quality of reporting when used by the author, as shown when using CONSORT reporting guideline for randomized controlled studies. It was also found that there is significant improvement in the quality of reporting when used by the reviewer, as shown when using STROBE, a reporting guideline for observational studies. Now, there are many more studies out there demonstrating the positive outcomes of using reporting guidelines. A question you might ask that can pop up is that, is there a citation advantage? Is it worth using these reporting guidelines? Well, there is a study published in the Radiology Journal that these authors looked at about 1,000 articles from Radiology Journal that complied with the STARD reporting guideline. And it was found that there was a positive but weak correlation to citation. Now, this is an interesting question, so I urge you to keep an eye on more publications on this subject. When you do get the chance, please visit the equatornetwork.org website. You will see a comprehensive list of reporting guidelines, such as you've got your consort, which are for randomized controlled trials. You've got your observational study reporting guideline called STROBE. You've got PRISMA for systematic reviews. You've got COREC for qualitative research. You have got SQUIRE for quality improvement studies. So there's quite a comprehensive list of these reporting guidelines. Oh, and they're all for free to download. Now, the following reporting guidelines directly relate to radiation oncology. Now, these articles suggest how dose to organs at risk should be reported. It also describes how endpoints should be reported. So these two reporting guidelines, one was published in the Red Journal and the other one was published in the Green Journal. Now, please go to the Equator website for other related reporting guidelines. Now, the following reporting guidelines directly relates to radiology. Now, the first paper is PRISMA for systematic reviews for diagnostic tests. Then the second paper is STARD, a reporting guideline for diagnostic accuracy studies. Now, after my session, I will copy and paste these references in Padlet. Now, on the JMIRO guideline, you will find the links to the relevant reporting guidelines, links to consort for randomized controlled trials. You've got your PRISMA for systematic reviews, STROBE for observational studies, and STARD for diagnostic tests. I highly encourage you to use these reporting guidelines prior to submitting to JMIRO. So I thought we'll just do a little bit of an activity just to demonstrate to you, to get a feel of how to use these reporting guidelines. So I noticed that no one uploaded their response to the Padlet, and I understand that it can be quite scary to be uploading one's critique of an article. But I do hope that you have read the article titled Profiling Italian Cat and Dog Owners' Perceptions of Pet Food Quality and Their Purchasing Habits. So this manuscript that I've given you is actually a preprint, so it hasn't been peer reviewed, but it is actually, in fact, version number 2. And this paper was then later published or was submitted to BMC Veterinary Research Journal and was then accepted for publication. So I'd like you to please grab your phone, or Kat will now copy and paste the Padlet link to the GoToMeeting chat. Please either use the QR code or click the link, and then you should end up in the Padlet website. So in the actual Padlet, you can view the STROBE reporting guideline, the manuscript, and of course your response. At the end of this session, I will upload my response in Padlet as well. So this is what the Padlet looks like. You should see a positive icon at the bottom right corner of your screen. If you click the plus icon, it will then allow you to type, and then I think it's called publish rather than submit as the button you press to publish your views. So I thought we'll just do a little bit of activity. So if you could just answer for me if this is your first time to use a reporting guideline. So I just need to make sure that I've actually got an audience. So I thought this is one way of checking that there is some sort of participation happening. I'll give you a few moments. I'll just log into my laptop to see if there's any responses. Wonderful. So most people have said it's first time. There's some that says not the first time, which is wonderful. So I hope for those people that says it's their first time, that it won't be the last time that you'll be using a reporting guideline. Now, thank you very much for responding. So we'll just quickly look at this manuscript. The study objective was to identify the what dog and cat owners consider quality indicators when purchasing food for their pet. The participants were recruited from pet stores and sector fairs all over Italy. I thought I mentioned this to you, who the target audience is. The target, according to the article itself, the manuscript, target audience are more likely to be the pet food companies. Now, I thought I'd tell you this because when I was reading this manuscript, I had that in my mind. I imagine myself to be a representative from a food company trying to make sense whether I have all of the necessary data to make a decision whether I should change my practice. So for those of you that have read the Strobe reporting guideline and now also have read the manuscript, could you just type a few words on what you thought should improve? What are the missing items from Strobe reporting guideline? Now, please enter your response. I'll give you a few minutes. Yep, that's good. The obvious one is that the title doesn't include the study design. And in fact, the cross-sectional study design, the term itself, cross-sectional study design, is missing from the title and the abstract. So in the interest of time, let me quickly just go through my responses, and please continue to type your responses, and I'll look at your responses along the way. Okay, so as it was mentioned, the term cross-sectional study design is missing on the title and the abstract. I know the word survey is on the abstract, but the survey is the tool, not the study design. I suppose if you're being pedantic about these things. And as to the reason why it's essential, the term cross-sectional study design to be included in the title of the abstract, for those people that are doing literature searching, they normally would want to indicate the study design. Say, for example, if it's a randomized controlled trial that they want, they would actually write randomized controlled trial. So same thing again for case study. So the same thing for cross-sectional study designs. So I hope you've noticed that the actual methods section is actually missing on the abstract. And I actually looked at the actual final publication from the BMC Veterinary Research Journal, and actually that journal do not publish the methods section on the abstract, which is quite bizarre to me. But anyway, that's their decision. And then the others, I think there were no problems with that at all with regards to what it contains. The one thing that I thought was missing in the methodology is the sample size calculation. Look, in a cross-sectional study, there will be some studies where you can justify that a sample size calculation is not ideal. And if the reviewer asks you to justify it, you just have to simply justify it, why you thought a sample size calculation was not recommended or not ideal for your situation. But in most cases, I would think that a sample size calculation is appropriate. Certainly, it's nice to know what the size of the population is. It will be very hard for you to work out how many were missed, or if there's a sort of bias happening in your respondents, if you don't know the number of people that were eligible to apply to complete the survey to begin with. The confidence interval. If you look at many of the textbooks on reporting, they urge authors to report confidence intervals. So with this particular manuscript, there were no confidence intervals that were reported. And again, when during the study design phase, during the data analysis phase, please do contact a statistician who can help you get the necessary numbers.
This is your 2-minute warning.
Oh, wonderful, thank you. And there's also the odds ratio. That odds ratio, I thought should provide more meaning to the data. For example, then you might say that owners under 65 years old are 2 or even 5 times more likely to pay attention to the presence of natural ingredients. Now, please note that I was just making up those odds ratio, but it actually provides you with results that would make sense to the reader, rather than just quoting frequencies and correlations. The figures 1 to 3, the graphs tell you that there is a difference, but it doesn't quantify that difference. Now, I just want to show you what I mean. This graph, it tells you, apparently this is the multivariate correspondence analysis. It tells you, all of these little letters over here tells you the quality indicators that the participants rated as important to them. And it tells you that the response of the people over 65 years old is drastically different to the response of the younger age group. It doesn't tell you how much of a difference. So to me, when I look at this profile by age group, it's simple visual representation that there is a difference, but doesn't tell you to what extent is it different. And of course, as Professor Delaney have mentioned, when you're writing discussion, your first paragraph should always be a summary of the key results with reference to the study objectives. In this particular paper, they began with the limitations, and I don't know why you would do that. It really would turn off the reader having to see all these limitations after reading all the results, and then they tell you that there are plenty of limitations. And that's it for me. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, Terry. Very informative. The guidelines, or reporting guidelines, really do make an excellent template for constructing your paper. There's only one issue that I would take with Terry's presentation. That is, you should consult your statistician before you start your study, not at the point where you've got all your results and you'd like them to find some magic number for you. I know of no better way than to irritate a statistician than to do that. So once you've got your paper and you've received this letter from me saying that your paper is accepted, you also get some advice that there are a number of things that you can do to make your paper more visible and to get it cited and read more widely. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the publication extras, podcasts, videos, and so on. And Ms. Evelyn Parsonage from Journal Publishing Manager at Wiley is going to talk about this. Evelyn manages a portfolio of life sciences and social sciences and humanities journal. In her role as Associate Publishing Manager, she oversees the business aspects of her titles and advises on strategic development. She has a special interest in bibliometrics and publishing analysis, open science, and ways to foster public engagement. She holds a Master of Arts from the University of Toronto, where she just studied literature of the Romantic period. I'm afraid that you won't find very much of that in our journals. So Evelyn, over to you. Thank you.
I'm very pleased to be here today to discuss how to make your work more impactful. And we've already discussed the process of publication, and you may think that getting published in a scholarly journal is the end of the journey. However, it's important to consider how you'll promote your work to a wide audience post-publication. If your peers don't know about your work, how will they cite it? Perhaps it has important findings that need to be communicated to a lay audience. In essence, readership is key. Today, I'll be highlighting a few opportunities that you can actively pursue as an author to ensure your work is accessed, read, and then cited. You're writing for a purpose, and greater exposure helps you to maximize your results and achieve greater impact. So as my colleague Simon has already mentioned, open access is very much the future of scholarly research, and we're already seeing the benefits. If your article is freely available to read, download, and share, we know that it's more likely to receive, on average, more downloads, citations, and media attention than a regular subscription article. As such, we do encourage you to consider publishing OA, especially if you're from Australia and New Zealand and you're an eligible author under that call agreement outlined by Simon. But a reminder that even if you are not eligible, JMIRO remains a hybrid journal, so you still have an avenue to publish a subscription article. For the majority of my presentation, I'm going to go over some of the article enhancement options that we offer with our provider, Wiley Editing Services. Evidently, these are services that I would promote as a Wiley colleague, but they cover all aspects of preparing and promoting your work that I think you can yourself initiate as an author, or you can engage the services of another provider. I do hope that these might spark some ideas and will sort of prompt you to think about your audience for communicating your research. So as Professor Delaney mentioned in the session on original article publication, language clarity is very essential. Even before submitting your article, you need to make sure that it's easily understood. There's no errors in spelling or grammar. And something that you can do is employ a service to do so, or you can actually go and read your article aloud. I've always found that to be very helpful to identify any run-on sentences or verbosity. So that's sort of the first step, is to think about the clarity of your language. Secondly, illustrations and graphical abstracts are something that can really highlight your work and simplify some of the, or elucidate the results in a visual manner. Professional illustrations can be produced, but if you're handy in, any web design, designing services, or you can use PowerPoint, they're easy to do. I've worked on a few medical journals in my time at Wiley, and I've always enjoyed browsing the table of contents of an immunology journal that published a lot of graphical abstracts. I'm certainly not an immunologist, but it certainly made me engage a bit more with the content, and I was sort of gravitating towards those articles as I saw them in the journal issues. Now I'll focus on what happens after publication. So you've got your article up online in HTML form and it's looking fabulous, but there's more you can do. And video abstracts are something that is really dynamic and can really translate that static page to something dynamic and engaging. Again, there's professional services and providers out there that can do this sort of work, but if you've got a camera and a willing, friend or family member to record you, you can easily prepare something summarizing your research. Essentially, it's important to remember your audience. So for your article, it might be your peers, but for the video, you might want to connect with the general public. So you might need to do some work to adapt your actual textual abstract into something a bit more accessible. I will note that the Journal of Medical Imaging and Radiation Oncology has a video abstract gallery, a dedicated place on the web page where these are housed. And I do encourage you to go check those out. There's 2 there at the moment, and they're good examples of this sort of work. The second thing I'll highlight is infographics, and these ones are a bit more challenging if you're not experienced in doing communicating complex medical research in a visual format. So I would certainly, if this is something you're interested in, potentially outsourcing that to either our Wiley editing services or finding someone else who can prepare something for you. Perhaps your work is really newsworthy and perhaps it has some broader applications, or it's very relevant to Australia and New Zealand, or it encourages a change in public behaviour. As such, we at Wiley have a dedicated publicity team on the lookout for research to promote in our channels, and we also have partnerships with the science media centres in Australia and New Zealand to highlight relevant content for the region. In addition, you as an author can work actively with potentially your media contact if you're based at a university or a research institute, and they can help prepare a press release if you anticipate that the research might get picked up in the news. This is something that's very important because journalists obviously are not scientists, and sometimes results can be misconstrued, and I have seen that happen before. So if you're anticipating that your article is going to receive some attention, I would greatly encourage you to construct a press release and some lay summaries as well. Furthermore, many people actually receive news nowadays on podcasts, and I love listening to podcasts myself. And at Wiley, we've developed a podcast called This Study Shows, which highlights recent developments in research. Each episode asks the tough science communication question: how, why, and so what? And I really encourage you all to think about that when you're proposing your research, writing your article. Why is this novel? Why should people care about it? And that can really govern your approach to publication. So furthermore, you might want to think about what kinds of podcasts you listen to, if there's any particular radiology podcasts that might be potential outlets for you to send summaries or engage to potentially become a guest on the show. This is something that is another way to get the word out there and increase the public engagement with your research. Finally, I'd just like to highlight the presence of journal metrics, and Simon mentioned altmetric as a indicator of non-citation activity. So altmetric is a weighted score that measures a journal article's attention in news channels, and this includes the mainstream media. So perhaps your article might get a feature on The Conversation or ABC News. And then it also tracks Twitter mentions as well as policy and patent mentions. So news article mentions hold more weight compared to Twitter mentions. And this information is tracked in real time for the journal, so you can access it by navigating to your article's HTML website and then clicking on the right-hand side across to the information tab, where you'll be able to see your altmetric score. You'll also see your citation information uploaded here, and this is, as I said, all updated in real time. So I encourage you to engage with that. To summarize, as I said, there's a lot of ways to promote your work depending on who you want to reach. And the more, the greater the readership of your work, the more chances you'll receive, citations and also potentially news mentions. And I really hope that this has sparked some ideas in your mind about science communication and perhaps any opportunities for collaboration with colleagues, friends, yeah, that's all from me for today. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Evelyn. Please, if you've got questions for Evelyn or any of the presenters, put them in the question box and we will deal with them at the end. So our next speaker is Mark Beckett. Mark is a radiology registrar in New Zealand and he's the social media associate editor for JMIRO. In that role, he's been spectacularly successful. He's launched JMIRO on Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn. We have over 1,000 followers in just a couple of years and over 200,000 impressions. So Mark is going to talk today about how to get your paper noticed, how to promote your research with things like search engine optimization. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, Professor Barton, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. Professor Barton's very highly exaggerated our success with JMIRO and social media, but we owe a lot of credit to his leadership in launching this and recognizing the importance of promoting your research. So I'm a radiology registrar in Auckland and associate professor at associate social media editor at the journal. And I guess I would just like to add a disclaimer that I have nowhere near as many publications as the speakers before me, with 2 titles to my name, with one being very low down the author list. But I did decide to see sort of citations of those articles that I've been involved in. And I have been lucky that the citation numbers for the very few articles that I've got are reasonably high. And so it's something probably by luck and a little bit from my marketing side, that I like marketing worthy stories like e-scooter injuries and healthcare costs, which certainly helped with my luck. So we'll talk a little bit more about how we can potentially increase our luck and make our luck as well in terms of promoting your research. And it really follows on very nicely from Evelyn's talk as well. So this is a image from Wiley that I've used, and it shows you roughly where people find your publications once they're published. You can see the vast majority of search engines, so that includes Google as well as Google Scholar, and then more like PubMed and more serious academic searches. Other websites linking to it is a huge portion. Type bookmark tends to be more sort of go-to review articles, and then social networks, which we'll discover, which we'll talk about. This 1% probably underestimates it quite a bit for a few reasons. One, in terms of how long ago this was, and other reasons. But we've talked before already that subject material and how newsworthy a piece it might be might contribute a lot in terms of how much attention you get, but there are lots of things in your control, and that's what we'll focus on today. And so that's basically SEO, or search engine optimization, running on other websites, and social media, and we'll cover each of those 3. So first on to SEO, because it is that bulk 50% thing, and you'll find that actually the other 2 link into SEO as well. So I do want to add that the number 1 thing for SEO is your title. And so just like how we were talking before with Cherry about titles needing to include certain things as part of the criteria, the keywords that you know people will be searching for to find your article need to be in the title, because Google and all the other search engines prioritize title a lot higher than all the others. It's then inevitable that abstract would be the next highest thing. And as we said, even though we're in this transitionary phase where open access is becoming more popular, search engines often will just evaluate based on title and abstract, especially if it's not an open access publication. So remember that any keywords that you think might be useful for search should go either in the title if it's key, or in abstract if not. And this one is a bit more controversial from the marketing point of view, I would have to point out, than the academic point of view, but it's to know your keywords and use variants if need be. An example that we'll talk about maybe is imaging features versus imaging findings in radiology, for example, and where while in academic publications, you do want to be consistent, and so I don't want to advise too strongly on this, but know the trade-offs that you're making in terms of maybe not landing as high in the search engines for alternative keywords that people might use, including, let's say, American spelling versus British spelling. And just to touch on the idea of mesh terms, which is medical subject headings, these are a predefined set of terms that are widely agreed upon for indexing journals and indexing articles. And it is worthwhile heading over to the mesh website to find out a bit more about the mesh terms within your topic of publishing before you publish, so you can make sure to include those in your state publication. Now, we'll talk about writing elsewhere now, as well as social media. And perhaps the most important thing to mention is that every single thing that you do outside of that helps with the search engine rankings, because search engine rankings weigh backlinks or links from other sites, including social media, super highly. And so we'll rely on that to indicate that it's a popular article and therefore rank it higher. So this is probably an example from one of my favorite radiologists, Lauren Ogden-Rayner, and she has a fantastic blog on distilling some of her research in AI, particularly in radiology and in medicine more generally, to the public. And you can see her use of GIFs, which are partially captured on this screenshot, but it does make it a lot more accessible. And it's no surprise her work recently, including this AI finding racism going viral on social media, thanks to her good work. But I do want to say that writing your own blog, while probably the penultimate form of this in terms of creating backlinks, if you feel overwhelmed by that, there are simpler options. You can even search on Reddit and Quora forums where the questions have been asked regarding your field and answer questions around them. Remembering again that these are high ranking sites, Reddit and Quora, and so backlinks from those sites to your article are actually very powerful in increasing the search engine algorithm ranking. Guest posts on blogs, you'll be surprised how many people are very keen because they want more content on their blogs. So don't be afraid to reach out to them. And then medium.com, if you haven't heard of it, it's kind of a nice way to rent a blog or for free, where you can publish without having your own blog. And once again, it's a high ranking site. And so it helps with backlinks, not just for those who read the blog post. And so in terms of the social media side, the same things that we were talking about for, the same things that we were talking about for, it's just frozen, that we were talking about for the backlinks, improving your search engine rankings, also work for social media. And so while it used to be 1% impact from social media, it's massively increasing. And a recent study actually found that 50% of all articles that they assessed were tweeted. And that was huge to me in terms of, I personally, before joining Twitter for this role, to be honest, I thought Twitter was mainly about Donald Trump because that's the only time I heard it in the news mostly. And so I wasn't really aware of Twitter's power in terms of the academic community. And it's really been life-changing ever since. And so if you haven't already joined Twitter in your academic career, then it's something I would highly encourage. It not only provides the initial coverage, but has that boost in search engine algorithms that we've talked about. And I find it amusing when I was looking into improving citations from tweets that they actually did a randomized control trial on this, which was amazing. And so this journal literally tweeted every second or randomized which articles it published, and found a huge increase in citations of 3.1 citations per article that was tweeted versus 0.7. And so that's pretty impressive, because we always have in other research articles on this a lot of conflating points of view, but this randomization really was quite impressive. A lot of, and more importantly than this mean increase, the actual likelihood of others tweeting about it were 9 times higher when the journal had randomized it into tweeting the study. So it also begs the point that not only should you be tweeting on your own, but you should be choosing a journal ideally that has a strong Twitter following, because it will actually contribute quite drastically to how far your research reaches. So that was an interesting, and that's backed up by these 2 stats from different studies, where it shows that the Twitter mentions are more correlated or more increased from the journal's social media profile following than from your own. And it makes sense that the journal would have more of a weighting, given that they are the ones distributing your work. And in terms of actually how do you go about doing this on social media, you don't just start when you get published, ideally, in that you really want to share the journey about whether you're thinking about or what you're struggling with at the time. And I have to say that as an introvert, this is very hard to grapple with, but the people who do and sort of share their research progress in public definitely perform a lot better than those who are only promoting once it's already published. And now this may feel overwhelming, the amount of places you might need to write, but the useful tip that I've seen in the serial producers are that they write one blog post or article and then adjust it for Twitter audience and for LinkedIn audiences likewise, so that it's not as overwhelming. In terms of if you're new on Twitter, you might want to join conversations already happening in the space and follow those people before just tweeting or to a dead audience. And it really is for those who are serious about their academic career. And if you are, then it's a very good investment. LinkedIn is more important for online searches, because undoubtedly when research grantors or the likes search you on Google, they're likely to find your online resume through LinkedIn. And so it's an important area there. And remember, once again, that the algorithm support from having your own friends and colleagues liking or engaging with your post will help others see your research as well. So now a quick practical example. Like with Jerry, if you just scan this QR code or go to slido.com and enter this number, then we have a practical example where we want you to read through this abstract and come up with a title that you think might be attractive based on what we've talked about. You'll in real life spend a lot longer than this, but give it your best shot in terms of coming up with a title for this. So if you can please give it your best shot while reading and enter it on the Slido app. All right, so we've got our first one, checkpoint inhibitors and their applications in cancer. I like it. So checkpoint inhibitors being a key word there, and their applications cancer. Good. Other submissions. A picture tells 1,000 toxicities. That's a really good one for a tweet. I would love to use that on Twitter, and if I saw that article title, it would just be doing my job for me. So thank you. Side effects from a new cures for cancer. I like that that's sort of a layman's approach and would be potentially using that for a blog post. Adverse events relating to immune checkpoint inhibitors, a pictorial review. That's a really nice detailed one and quite close to the real thing. And then the new one just come in, imaging findings associated with immune checkpoint inhibitors. Very good. Those are some really good examples. That's the link if you do want to have a look. And the real title is actually quite similar to what you all used, and this is a recent article in JMIRO published this month. Imaging findings of common immune checkpoint inhibitor related adverse effects. So they have put in imaging findings, which is quite important, especially for getting reach as a pictorial essay for desperate radiology registrars like myself Googling on call about whether this is an immunotherapy related reaction or not. So I really like that. And I would always add this in my Google search when I am desperately looking on call. Immune checkpoint inhibitor related adverse effects. That's also very useful and was covered in a lot of your comments that you guys put through. So thank you. If I were to possibly critique this at all or point out that there is sort of a distinction here between imaging findings and features, and that again in the abstract it's used findings. And so when I was searching this in Google, if you search imaging features in immune checkpoint inhibitor related adverse effects, it's quite low down the list. And so that's sort of a point to remember. The other thing to think about is that they have mentioned radiology. I often search when people are searching for a specific topic like a radiology pictorial essay, they will add radiology in the search point. And if possible, I would even consider adding it to the title to boost that likelihood, because a lot of others in this space doing it. It is important that they used immune checkpoint inhibitor related adverse effects rather than immunotherapy related effects. This is much more of a layman's term, and it possibly could be included in the title, but that's sort of probably more targeted at a senior audience here rather than a layperson's audience, so that's perfectly appropriate as well. One critique that I do think they should have included in the abstract, if possible, is the most common adverse effects. So thyroiditis, pneumonitis, for example, within the abstract, or mentioning those. The reason being, when I searched imaging findings, thyroiditis, immune checkpoint inhibitor related effects, or pneumonitis, this article didn't show up, but it might have if that was included in here, because the further points in the article, like I mentioned before, aren't ranked in the algorithm. So excellent, thank you so much for participating in that. I do want to finish with some key take-home messages. You really want to be strategic with your keywords, especially those title and abstract. It's amazing because marketers have a saying where half of the time on their blog post is just spent on the title and A/B testing the best title. And us researchers, even though we're the ones that are more rigorous with our writing, tend to skip over the title a lot more. So if you take one thing away from this, think about your title a lot longer than you'd expect to. Write about your article once and distribute it widely amongst the blog posts and social media, which will help your article rank higher, in addition to the boost that you get from people directly seeing it. And invest in personal branding. If you are looking to get into an academic career, you need to join Twitter and LinkedIn now. It only gets harder with time to build an audience, and so you need to get started from an early on. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. It's a pleasure to be here, and hopefully that helped a little. Here are some further resources and references for your viewing later if you need.
That's great, thanks Mark. And can I ask all the presenters to join us, turn on their microphones and their cameras. While they're doing that, I'll just go through the questions that we've had. One is a comment that lots of brief writing sessions may be more productive than putting it off until there is a prolonged free period. I think that probably depends on your personal style of writing. A complimentary comment about Jeff's presentation. And there is a question which I'll ask. I guess Jeff probably is most published panelist here. Thanks for the great webinar. How long is too long between initial first choice journal rejection, disappointing after addressing reviewer comments, and resubmission elsewhere, with live COVID interposed between? So did you get that, Jeff?
I did, although I wonder about which period they're talking about. Because one question that comes up frequently is how long to wait for reviewer comments. There are some journals that are notorious that you wait 3 months or longer. I think waiting 3 months, I would contact the editorial office and find out what's happened. Sometimes it can be inadvertent that one reviewer just hasn't got back to them in time and they're aware that they're running late. But I would at least give the journal the opportunity to close the loop for you with reviewer comments. With respect to turning it around after rejection, I think you get back on the horse straight away. That, you know, what are you waiting for other than getting over the disappointment? You know, obviously the reviewer's comments need to be taken on board. If the reviewer's comments are very, very harsh, then you need to seriously consider whether the reviewer has been unnecessarily harsh or whether you've just aimed your article far too high. And I would seek the counsel of experienced authors to resolve that issue. But there's nothing holding you up once the journal has rejected your article.
I would say there's also two issues. One is that your data may become well out of date.
That's true, yeah, that's a problem.
And the other is someone else may publish the same thing before you get a chance. So best, as Jeff says, to strike while the iron is hot.
I find if you leave it too long, then you run the risk that you don't publish it.
So the other questions that we have for the panel today are about collaboration. And I have a question for a number of the panel, I think Cherry and Mark in particular. What was your best collaboration experience and why? So Mark.
Yeah, sure. The e-scooter study that I did was a collaboration between radiology and imaging findings of it and ED. And I had two supervisors there as my first publication, an ED SMO and a radiology SMO. And that was super helpful in having different aspects be supported. I found that me giving my best go at the draft, which was probably, to put it politely, rubbish writing initially, as Professor Delaney might think of it, but it was really helpful to have both their inputs in terms of reviewing that article and putting in a lot of contribution to improving that. So I'm really thankful, and those track changes that that Professor Delaney did mention were super useful, and I feel like it's putting me in much better stead for my next publication.
And Cherry, your collaboration experiences, what's the best sort?
The best ones, the ones where it feels like every single member of the team knows their role. I didn't feel that there was backstabbing, for one thing. It was everyone knows their role. There was no nagging. There were no tears. So and of course the paper got published at the end. So from the study design to the implementation of the study to the publication. So yes, it's not as often as it should, that experience, but it's good when it happens.
I guess that probably begs the question. I've taken this slightly out of order. Who's the collaborator for Hell? Name no names, and Jeff, particularly you and I have written over 100 papers together, so my name is out on this list. But what are the characteristics of that collaborator from Hell, Jeff?
It's really a continuation on of the previous question. You know, people often regard some collaborators who might be contrary in their view to be a collaborator from Hell. I actually like having a collaboration where there is a difference of opinion, because I think that makes you seriously think about what you're doing. Sometimes it's hard to resolve, because if there are strong personalities, then at the end of the day, somebody has to make a decision. And I've always taken the view that the principal author makes the final decision. So if I'm a senior author, I'm giving advice to the first author. But if they decide not to take that advice, then that's okay. At least hopefully they've considered the advice. So I like collaborations where everybody is contributing. They're often contributing different things, and they're contributing different opinions, because I come away learning something, and I become better at something, particularly better at writing. So the converse of that is the collaborator from hell, in my opinion, is the gunner person. They're gonna do this and they're gonna do that, and they do very little. And they often, all they do is hold the paper up. Or someone who wants token authorship, you know, that they're not really committed to the subject matter. And I think that's relatively easily sorted out early on when you're experienced. I think that's a lot harder when you're inexperienced, because obviously you don't have that experience to help guide you.
So what do you do then? If you're a junior author, like, well, Mark, let's say, and he has somebody senior who wants their name on his paper, his wonderful e-scooter paper, which I must admit is the sort of thing I would read. So what do you do?
I think the authorship issue is particularly hard, particularly for junior people where perhaps their direct boss is wanting to be an author. And it's very hard to give advice without knowing the specifics of every. I think you have to individualize the decision based on relationships and so forth. I would hope that the principal author has a good relationship with a senior mentor, hopefully on the paper, who they can go to and seek advice. And I would listen very carefully to that advice from the senior author. Sometimes it may just be easier to accept that, okay, somebody's going to be, you know, the 8th author in line, big deal. It's not a big deal. It's not worth the war. But that always grinds with me a little bit, because it's not in the true spirit of those criteria that I presented earlier. And so, once again, early on, I like to establish who's going to be part of this or not. You know, it's interesting. I'm writing a paper at the moment where myself and 2 or 3 other people have done the heavy lifting, but I did indicate to a group of other people that I wanted their input. So when I wrote the draft, I sent the email around saying that if I don't hear from you in 2 weeks with respect to the manuscript, then I'll assume you don't want to be an author. And really then put the onus on them to either contribute or not contribute. Now, some people might choose to make a token contribution. I just have to swallow that. But, you know, in fact, you know, the people that I work with, I know very well now, so I know where to aim the email and who to include and who not to include. But that's a long journey to get to that stage.
And Simon, at our last webinar, you spoke about the publication ethics. There is a major ethical issue about this that's often very difficult to navigate. Would you just like to sort of recap the sort of ethical position?
Yeah, there is, and I think there's a lot more clarity coming through at the moment, and a lot more openness about the discussions as well. Like in the past, I think we've had a lot more, like the story about the overbearing lab manager or research, head of research, or the people who have inserted themselves onto papers was a lot more prevalent. I think there's a bit more transparency around it now, and as was mentioned earlier on, those guidelines are really important. The ICMJE guidelines, where the "and" at the end of each dot point was clearly noted, that's really important, because that gives you a tool to defend authorship on a paper that you're involved in. Once you've got an authority to appeal to, you can say, well, do you qualify under these guidelines? And if not, is an acknowledgement more appropriate? There's also the notion of contributorship as well, which some journals are considering, and some journals that even who maintain authorship are considering adding to their articles, and that looks at quantifying and qualifying how much input each author has had to the paper. So it will be author 1 has contributed to the study design and the research work. Author 2 has done 50% of the writing and editing. Author 4 was head of lab and did this practical work. Actually enumerating what people have done and why they qualify for authorship, as well as the ICMJE guidelines that mean everyone has read the article, everyone's contributed to the article, everyone agrees and with the content and can be held responsible for the statements put in place. I think those elements are starting to clean up these discussions quite a bit, and the idea of someone swanning in and demanding an authorship credit is getting harder to manage. That being said, that doesn't count for personalities and status and rank within institutions and research groups. So that's always going to be a consideration, but hopefully where we talk about the ethical practices and the tools around it, those might be helpful as well.
And then the consideration is also the flow-on effects of that relationship in that person's place of work, which becomes really a matter of bullying, which is very complicated in its own right.
Sure. My favourite collaboration is between the epidemiologist and his dog for a paper in the MJA on the benefits of dog walking. Adrian Bowman and Jack Russell Bowman for the Christmas edition. So some journals have different standards.
Yeah, but what contribution did the dog make?
I think probably quite a bit to Adrian's waistline. There is one more question, and this is a question for Evelyn. In terms of engaging infographics and video abstracts, this is a new concept for me. Who can we approach to get help with this? Do most institutions have someone to help with it? If not, how expensive is it to approach someone externally? Evelyn.
As I mentioned in my presentation, yes, we at Wiley Editing Services, there is we have a website and all the quotations for costs are there. The costs are quite substantial, I would say, for a video abstract. It's around $500 US. But again, if you've got if you work at a university or in a hospital or another research institution, you might have a media contact who can work with you to develop a lay summary or a video abstract. Yeah, so I would say that there's those options to pay, and I can drop the link to Wiley Editing Services in the chat. But certainly, I would suggest, yeah, investigating avenues to produce these in collaboration with colleagues or friends.
One of the difficulties, I think, too, and sorry, Michael, one of the difficulties as well, and same with Simon's presentation around open access, is these are additional costs that are not factored in normally to any research budget. And so as a research leader, it's very hard to know where to find this funding when people come to you wanting to publish their paper and wanting the organisation to cover open access costs or editing and desktop publishing costs. I really don't know what to do about it, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a real consideration.
I was about to say, I thought 500 US was actually quite modern.
Yes, but whose pocket should it come out of? The organisation or the individual's personal wallet?
Oh, even for organisations. Sorry, Simon, I cut you off. You were going to say something about the cost of open access. And this is one of the great things about the call.
No, exactly right, and I think that's where this is the important part of abstracting that payment away from authors, where we saw kind of open access 1.0. It was author focused. It was authors being hit with a fee around making their articles available, and either having to talk to their funding bodies or split with their co-authors, or looking at whose budget on whose institution may have a line item for this. The beauty of the call arrangement and these arrangements that we see them more globally is it's going back to an institutional level or a consortia level or even a funding level, where we think of the major public funders that are moving in this direction. They see the benefit in making research more openly available and getting that in front of more people. And the benefit is being able to consolidate that back up again at that level and moving it away from authors. So I'm hoping that's going some way to address this as a dilemma for the individual author. Certainly where it comes to promotion, that's a slightly different question. But again, when we look at the cases where there's funding involved, much more attention is being given to the overall impact of the research post-publication. So we're seeing that there's starting to be some support for promotion as well as just publication and research. But I think that's still got a way to go. Hopefully, as we go ahead with more examples, we can start to demonstrate the reach that it does have.
So
and I do think as well,
internet is dropping off, and so I've turned off my video.
I was just going to say as well that the movement away from printing has really opened up avenues for
On
digital.
that note, I think we might.
Oh, sorry. Opened up avenues for digital promotion, and we are seeing, you know, a lot of interest in that space. So I'll just...
Well, I apologise. My internet has finally faded away. Living in the country is it's one of the prices you pay. I would like to thank all of the presenters. It's been an excellent webinar. I've enjoyed it and I've learned quite a bit. I look forward to making my first podcast at some point. We are recording all of the, we have recorded all of this. It will be available on the college website, and there will be a survey of the audience, which the college will circulate in a few days. So thank you again, everybody, for attending. I hope you've enjoyed as much as I have, and thank you again to all the presenters.
Thank you.